Yeah, welcome. Thank you for coming. So it's good to see that so much people are interested in the topic. So our session is today on groundwater and finance, something which never really came together before. I'm personally from a more academic technical background, and the groundwater community had no really connection to finance the last decades. And we discovered that there's some potential. And I think from the finance sector, groundwater is really a niche, and we discovered that it's worth to work together and to cooperate and to discover new space. This has a good reason. First, there's some challenges, especially if you look on the African continent and sub-Saharan Africa. I think we face still some challenges. 50% of the rural population is still not connected to safe water supply today in the rural areas. And the African continent, sub-Saharan Africa, is very much dependent on the agricultural sector. So 60% of the GDP is related to agriculture, and no, 30%, sorry, and 60% is of the jobs on the African continent. So and this in times where we are facing more and more climate change. We experienced it here in Europe this year very much, the last years very much. On the African continent, I think 3% of the agricultural area is just irrigated. So this means they're very susceptible to climate change and drought events. So this is one thing. So this is this is the challenges they are facing. And on the other hand, we from the groundwater community, we were focusing very much the last 20 years on regulation of groundwater resources, which is a really severe problem. If we look to the MENA region, to Asia, India, for example, so they experience very big problems with that, but we completely ignored that the situation is on the sub-Saharan region completely different. And let me give you some figures that will show you how the situation is and the difference to this to the situation. So if we would calculate the entire water use on the African continent, it means domestic, agriculture, industrial use, it wouldn't even exceed 25% of the renewable groundwater resources. If we look on a country base, it doesn't mean on the single basins, but if we look on the continent as a bucket. And the continent could easily provide each person 130 liter safe water supply. But it doesn't happen so far. And so we look on the reasons for it. So we see that we don't have a resource problem. We have a problem to access a resource. We have and to develop groundwater resources. So this means also we have a huge potential we could tap on the continent. Because I mentioned 3% of the agricultural area is irrigated, and just 5% of that area, of this 3%, with groundwater. So the water which is available could massively increase food security for the people and create economic development and income and poverty reduction. So there was a really interesting session also on Thursday, purely virtual session from the International Food Policy Research Institute, and they did a macroeconomic modeling based on national economic models, and they could prove that if we would double the groundwater use, it would have a massive impact on GDP, on job creation, on poverty reduction. So the study was carried out in Uganda, Senegal, and Namibia, and we will hear also some case studies from these countries here today. Yes, this potential was discovered already a couple of years ago, and the African Ministers' Council on Water, AMCOW, within the African Water Week, the African water ministers claimed in 2018 to increase the engagement to unlock the social economic development of groundwater resources. And the answer from AMCOW was the development of the AMCOW Pan-African Groundwater Program. And all what we see here today is part of the program. And I'm happy that I have my first speaker today, Moshood Tijani from AMCOW, from the African Ministers' Council on Water. He will give us the first welcome remarks and the potential of groundwater for social economic development. Moshood. Do you hear me, Moshood?
Yes, I'm hearing you. Thank you.
Very good to have you here, Moshood.
Yeah, should I share my slide or you are projecting?
We have video. I don't see it here.
Can I share my slide or you are projecting?
Yes. Yusuf, could you maybe assist in that? Very good. Yeah, here Moshood Tijani is a groundwater desk manager from AMCOW. Welcome, Moshood.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here today. I welcome all of you who are there physically, and I welcome those that are also joining virtually. I have a goodwill message from the AMCOW Executive Secretary, who is unavoidably absent because of the other competing. It is right there in Stockholm, but there is other competing high-level meeting that is going on relating to African water focus. So on this note, I want to say, I hope you are seeing my slides, or are you sharing the slide, or I'm the one sharing? Hello?
Can someone please confirm that you can see his slides?
Are you seeing my slides?
No, we can't.
No, it would. The question is, can they see it in the room?
Yeah. And I don't know whether it's being shared from that end or should I share it from my hand? That's the question, please.
I think, Moshood, I believe you should share it on your screen, and that way they can share it in the room.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so as I said, thank you for being part of this program, and I appreciate the BGR for putting this event together. It is quite interesting to know that potential of groundwater in Africa for socio-economic development is huge. And we have a lot of untapped potentials that we can take advantage of. And if you look at these slides, I don't know, the slide is not moving. I didn't know what is happening. Okay, so.
We're seeing it. It had come, but so you just lost it. But
okay, let me share again. Okay, now super. So, untapped potential of groundwater is very huge in Africa. A lot of research is taking place in most parts of Africa, and then we have a lot of storage. And therefore, from the introductory opening from Raymond, it means that the potential is there. How do we harness this potential? If you're able to harness this potential, we'll be able to at least be able to increase our GDP and be able to increase the sustainable development, attain the sustainable development goal. Tapping these untapped resources give us a good advantage in addressing key challenges in Africa. Wash, sustainable city, because many cities are increasingly depending on groundwater. Irrigation, to enhance food security relating to smallholder agriculture, poverty reduction, industrial production, or for climate adaptation because of the resilience of groundwater for climate change. So these untapped resources are there to address these challenges in Africa and ensure both water for sanitation, water and food security in Africa. And what is the AMCO intervention? AMCO has, based on this, developed what we call the upper group, which is the Pan-African Groundwater Program, which is to address the issue of groundwater and to leverage on science and advanced groundwater policy and practice in Africa, so that member states can take the full advantage of the potential multiple uses that groundwater gives us. And within this framework, we have 5 thematic focus area within the upper group. We talk of the policy, governance, institution, knowledge sharing, groundwater management and resource assessment. We talk of the awareness and capacity development that is needed to advance the sustainable groundwater development. And at the end of the day, there is partnership and the need for finance and investment in groundwater, which is the core area of this discourse today. So the finance is key. Without this finance, all these other components cannot be achieved. And that is why this session is very key today. And we know within the upper group framework, we know we can't do this alone with AMCO. We have to work with the regional economic community. We have to work with the science community. We have to work with member states. We have to work with partners, development partners, and collaborate with other water stakeholders, youth, gender inclusion. This inclusiveness is very key, and that is the focus of AMCO within this framework. So, of course, what will be the role of AMCO in groundwater finance? If you look at the graph on this side, the sustainable development of groundwater resources is based on 3 key pillars, as AMCO perceive it. The resource assessment. We must first understand what we have before we can manage. And then there must be groundwater access infrastructure. That's another key pillar. And the 3rd pillar is finance. Without the finance, we won't be able to access what we have and won't be able to provide these resources through the infrastructural development that is needed. And at the base of this pillar, we have the capacity buildings and the stakeholder involvement. We have the effective maintenance of the infrastructure that is also needed. It's not also good to provide infrastructure alone. You need the maintenance of those infrastructure. And these are the key pillars and the cross-cutting pillars that support sustainable development of groundwater. And that is the basis, that is the approach that AMCO is looking at it. And in understanding all these things, it means that AMCO has to play a critical role in mobilizing both commercial and private finance to fund groundwater resources development for socio-economic development in Africa. And moving forward within this framework, how do we get adequate finance for groundwater resources tapping for sustainable development? You can see 5 key areas of intervention that groundwater will contribute to socio-economic development. And more than 12 out of 17 development goals will be achieved using only sustainable groundwater development to attain rural groundwater supply, to attain urban water supply, to enhance, to fight climate change due to as buffer to climate change, to enhance regional cooperation through transboundary water management, groundwater management, and to also ensure that we have ecosystem sustenance. Of course, smallholder irrigation that will ensure food production. You can see this range of areas where groundwater can serve as good opportunity to advance different SDG. And with this, we can use groundwater to advance socio-economic development in Africa while also attaining the development goal. It is within this framework that we think groundwater finance and infrastructural finance is very key. And that is why we are appealing to members and the participants at this forum today to look at this emerging area that finance is key. And on this note, I want to say thank you for being here today, and thank you, and I wish you fruitful deliberation in this very important topic. Thank you.
Would you mind turning on the microphone so we could hear?
They developed a tool to unlock investments and to look at the financial ecosystems at local scales. My first speaker is Professor Edward Mbale, Dean of the School of Economics, Makerere University in Uganda, Kampala. And he's professor for economy, and he was very much responsible for the finance framework and for the study we carried out in Uganda and for the development of the tool. Professor Mbale, would you please give us some insights from your work of the last 2 years, please? Professor Mbale? Professor Mbale, you hear me?
I don't know if that person's in chat. You may need to go on.
Yeah, Professor Mbale. Does the microphone work or not? Okay. So then Dimitri Potsiaev, could you please, you were supposed to share this presentation, but you might do the entire presentation by yourself, Dimitri?
Well, thank you so much, Ramon. But I believe they are expecting Professor Umar Kakumba to talk now rather than Professor Mbale. Yes.
Okay. Sorry for that. Yeah, then Professor Umar Kakumba. Just have no information about him. So he's yeah, also from Makerere University. Could you please, Professor Kakumba, could you please give us some insights from your research and your studies the last 2 years?
Many thanks to you, moderator. I want to take this opportunity to appreciate this time and everyone else joining us. I'm joining you from Kampala, Uganda. For the record, Umar Kakumba is my name. I am the Deputy Vice Chancellor in charge of academic affairs at Makerere University. I come in here not necessarily as a researcher in this, but as part of the top leadership of the university in Makerere. Yeah, that has been working very, very closely with the team, the UN Capital Development Fund, and the other partners, the BGR, the University of Namibia, University of Shanta Diop, Dakar, and many others that joined. We have a team from Makerere, Yusuf, Professor Bale, the one that you had called on earlier on. So my coming in here basically for the keynote is to appreciate, one, the strategic partnership and initiatives on the issues regarding financing of the groundwater. As already here highlighted, you'll agree with me that you know, groundwater financing is very, very critical for obvious reasons in this part of the world. Yeah, our developing countries, the countries like Uganda, where over 80% of the livelihoods of our people sustainably depend on agriculture. And then with the vagaries of weather now going, you know, badly, you know, where you have extended droughts and where you have, you know, crops getting, you know, destroyed, and then you get food security issues and the hunger. Lately in Karamoja, one of the regions in the northeastern part of the country, people have been dying of hunger. You would never have heard about this in, you know, in a decade or 2 decades ago. This was never the issue. So the point of groundwater is very, very important now. Quickly, as a training institution, what are our interventions as Makerere universities, and what would be our strategic, you know, focus in issues of groundwater and how we can come in to support all of this agenda? One way is definitely through the teaching and learning. The programs that we conduct Traditionally, teaching and learning has concentrated very much on issues of water development, water systems. Traditionally, it was an area that was cut out for the engineering faculty and probably the agriculture and biosystems engineering and civil. That's where it was located. You talk about it, everybody said, no, that is engineering. But as a university, we are revolutionizing our curriculum and training so that now issues of water are becoming issues of economics and development. That's why you see the faculty in economics, business, management is coming in. Law, there are issues of water, water rights, water, opportunities and what have you. So they are cross-cutting now. We are revising curriculum to create this as one of the fundamental areas of focus, such that when we train the human development, the human resources that we churn out, that works in government, in non-governmental organizations, especially the local authorities, the local government, you will have people who are well versed with the issues of water and the need to invest in water, and also finding cheaper mechanisms for the rural local communities that they can tap into, the vast, groundwater that is all around. Secondly, what we're also doing is to craft programs. We have the master of a regional masters of public infrastructure management. Now, this is a regional masters which was earlier supported by the Development Bank of Southern Africa. There was also the IDC, Industrial Development Corporation. The French and the AFD came in at the beginning, but their focus was mainly on the short training executive. But we wanted to run an interdisciplinary masters in public infrastructure management, which has been running on for the last 5 or 6 years, where we have given scholarships, Makerere being the hub, training Rwanda, training Kenya, Tanzania, and other region, other countries within the Eastern region. So that's one of the fundamental, the flagship program that trains middle and senior managerial people who occupy positions of stature in local authorities, in government, Ministry of Water, the NEMA, National Environment Management Authority, in Ministry of Works, Transport and Communication, in Ministry of Finance, and many others, even the National Water and Sewerage Corporation. So this program has become one of those really that are highly revered, but where we can, looking forward to partner with the UN Capital Development Fund and many others. The second and last area of my comment here is through research. Besides teaching and learning, research is important. And we, as education and higher educational institution in this country, our focus would be on issues of water and sanitation, alternative mechanisms of providing cheaper water, and then the financing, the capacity for local authorities. This work has already been done, with the support of UNCDF, working with Makerere University on developing tools and guidelines for subnational governments to doing financial analysis and the shadow rating and capacity building to improve the credit rating in these areas. So through research, we are able to inform policy, which is critical for government financing also to adjust so that we are addressing this critical area. So for now, I can stop there, but my appreciation in this is that we are creating a platform with international partners, just like you, and also to try and advocate, create more advocacy and awareness to the government, first of all, the local authorities, the non-governmental entities, but also creating awareness to the local communities on the importance of tapping into these water resources. I could stop there, Mr. Moderator. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Host, you are muted. If you can unmute, we can't hear you.
Dimi Potseaev leads the Uganda office of the United Nations Capital Development Fund, and he was mainly one of the heads behind the finance, groundwater finance framework. Please, Dimitri, go ahead.
Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation, Ramon, and it's a pleasure to be with you, colleagues, virtually. And also to say a few words in my double capacity as a UNCDF representative, but also as one of the researchers behind the tool and the case studies that will be presented to you today. Talking from the UNCDF perspective, and you could hear it from BGR as well as from my colleague, Dr. Kakumba from the Makerere University, the issue of financing the issue of groundwater in general, but in particular, financing groundwater is a topical issue for Africa. And allow me to mention one anecdote. Some colleagues who, Ramon, of course, is one of those, but some other colleagues here in the audience may remember that when we met 2 years ago in Kampala for the AMCOV meeting, African Council of Ministers on Water meeting, we established several thematic groups to discuss the issue of groundwater use, all kinds of technical issues around groundwater. But we had a real difficulty to constitute a group that would look into the financial issues. It seemed like the finance was assumed. It was assumed that it will somehow materialize and enable the different phases of groundwater exploration, use, and all other phases and aspects of applying groundwater to different users. As we know, in practical, in real life, this is not the case. And you would need to think about how you can finance different development interventions, including, not least, different uses of groundwater. So as UNCDF, we are interested in locating and detecting those financial solutions to different development problems that our partner countries face. UNCDF is a hybrid institution, and it combines the features of a development agency and a development finance institution. So we are operating on both sides of the spectrum, so to say, purely development approach, and that includes also different research activities. In that sense, we are very happy to have been cooperating for a long time with Makerere University, as well as striking new partnerships in the context of this very interesting initiative with the University of Dakar and the University of Namibia. But on the other hand, we are practitioners. And we are dealing with the practical issues of how different financial vehicles, financial instruments can be applied and put to use to ensure that our partner countries can mobilize, first and foremost, domestic finance, but also be able to tap into various international financial mechanisms to mobilize enough funding for their development interventions. So would this allow me to say a few words about the initiative, as well as the approach that we have used to advance this initiative and to give it some practical dimensions. I hope you can see my screen now. Can someone confirm if you can see my screen?
Yes, Dimitri, we see your presentation. You can start.
Thank you so much, Ramon. So we are very grateful to our partner BGR, which has directed and shaped our thinking in the direction of groundwater, and in particular, economic and financial issues of groundwater. In this initiative, we also have a number of other partners. As you can see, the Ministry of Water and Environment in Uganda, the Ministry of Water and Sanitation from Senegal, universities and research institutions. I have mentioned them shortly before, as well as AMCOV, who is our very reliable partner in this exercise. The purpose of this initiative is to develop framework for sustainable financing of groundwater management and utilization, develop guiding principles, enablers, and best practices for groundwater finance, focusing on the local level specifically, and develop the tools and financial models. We have talked enough, I believe, about the challenge. And the major challenge I have mentioned, the difficulty of constituting a team, a working group that would look into the financial matters of groundwater finance, which we faced. And obviously, it is an issue. We are encountering scarcity of innovative financial mechanisms, scarcity of required technical schemes, designs and effective groundwater financing mechanisms, which is obviously an obstacle to improving access to finance and the use of groundwater for different purposes. We have come up with a framework for groundwater finance. And this diagram gives you an idea about the key elements of the financing ecosystem for groundwater. There are a number of actors, and we looked into those actors. The actors, of course, include the financiers, various. It is industry, it is banks, multilateral financial institutions, and so on and so forth. Of course, the governments play a very important role. It's regional and international development agencies, non-governmental organizations, which provide a variety of finance sources. Basically, it is development funding and private capital. And specific financing structures that can be based on these sources include microfinance, concessional financing, as well as conditional grants. And then using that finance covers several phases in the groundwater value chain, starting with the exploration of groundwater and going all the way to its practical use and maintenance. The framework for financing groundwater looks into the external forces that trigger change, actors that contribute to resources, funding sources, both public and private, various financing structures, and financing structures, I've mentioned them, but specifically they can be grants, equity, short and long-term loans, bonds, loan rebates, and user fees, and so on and so forth, as well as specific financing models. And some of those financing models will be explained later as my Makerere colleagues will report to you about the case studies that have been completed. So in the context of this assessment tool and in the context of its practical application to the specific case studies, we have assessed or evaluated 4 dimensions, depending on the type of finance. So we looked into domestic public financing, domestic private financing, foreign public financing, and the foreign private financing. With this, I would like to hand over to my Makerere colleagues to further explain the dimensions, indicators, and the overall approach to the evidence-based performance for groundwater finance ecosystem.
Yeah, thank you. Applause for Dimitri Potsaev. I think it was a really good introduction into the topic and to the framework. Now we have the first presentation, physical one. So a lot of presenters didn't get their visa, so that's why we switched to a virtual one. But here we have Yusuf Kivale from Makerere University. You were very much responsible for the study, and so you could maybe give us the first results from the study. So I'm very curious to hear about it. Please, Yusuf.
Would it be possible to have him hold the microphone? It was on. You're good. I think you
picking from where Dimitri, my colleague, stopped. Basically, to throw more light on what actually we researched and actually found out, it starts with this framework. What are those elements in the financing framework in the different countries that contribute to financing groundwater? Under the parameters one, prerequisite is external forces that trigger change. Now, we are looking at this in the forms of economic incentives, which actually include, as we shall see, cost sharing, because groundwater is capital investment. So how do you have a small farmer come to put in their own resources to contribute to financing, not looking at government? This comes, one, as economic incentives, or it can be the regulations, the law, to attract private sector. So cost sharing, advance payment, we have seen models in Uganda where that happens. Two, who are the willing contributors? We don't underrate the role of the user of water. Who is a small farmer for irrigation? Who is a domestic user? Who has to pay user fees? We don't underrate that, because we know moving from the public funding where our governments are constrained, you want to commercialize. But how do you move towards that? And how do we try those alternatives? There are funding sources. We are looking at public funding and private funding. But how do you catalyze private funding? Because private goes where there's profit. So, but how do you move down that level? You use, we have seen the use of public funds to catalyze private investment as an incentive. The other element which is key in this ecosystem of financing groundwater is the financing structures. How do you, and what we see, as we shall see going forward, a blend of grants, a blend of concessional loans, as we see that in this sub-Saharan Africa, concessional loans are not on demand. The question is, why are they not on what? On demand, as we shall see going forward. But we say a mix of grants, equity financing, private donations, as we shall see, and also other commercial bonds coming on board. And the other thing is, how does it happen? How do we make sure that we have money together to fund a capital investment? And that's another area that we exhausted during our research. And how does it stand in Uganda? How does it stand in Senegal? How does it stand in Namibia, where we did the case studies? And we saw elements of pooled financing at community level, as we shall go forward. We saw elements of revolving funding. We saw elements of PPP, very prominent, as we shall see. Now, how does it look like? These are the major elements we exhausted in terms of indicators. For each of these, we examined different indicators, picking evidence of what is happening. And the indicators for domestic public finance, how does the structure of domestic public finance look like in different 3 countries? Domestic private, foreign public finance, but also foreign private financing for groundwater. Each of these happens, and we want to see what did it look like. Of course, the indicators were 24, we examined at the level of 4 dimensions. And quickly looking at the picture. Now the picture in red shows what happens in Uganda. The picture in green shows what happens in Senegal, and the picture in blue shows what happened in Namibia. Now, looking at the indicators 1 up to 8, the key evidence that comes across the 3 countries is that public financing is dwindling because the elements of financing COVID intervention and other areas. So water is one of those areas that actually was put on the side to go to the more urgent things. And that cuts across the 3 countries. Another important aspect is about capacity of local government. The local government have the opportunity to mobilize their own resources. The challenge is that they lack capacity to plan and mobilize those resources and attract private sector. Much as in the 3 countries, we see the law, PPP law, okay, available with incentive to come and finance or co-finance groundwater. So in the 3 countries, yes, PPP is there, but the demand for what you call like concessional loan is not there. There's fear, but also there's even capacity to mobilize the PPPs. The policy in Uganda, for example, if you look at the indicator for PPP, there's a PP policy, there's a regulation to subnational level. But I'll give you an example. In Namibia, there's a policy, but the guidance downward is not there. And that brings a difference. So if you're moving towards commercialization, the question is who will move faster? So there are things that have to be done within Namibia that have already been done in Uganda, as we shall see. But also when you come at the regulations, for example, one of the key sources of domestic finance for water is permitting. But the question is, you cannot permit without enforcing the law. And how does it look like in the different countries? The regulation is very strong in Uganda, but enforcement, okay, to some extent, and you see for Namibia and Senegal, the regulation is not as tough to ensure permitting and getting revenue through permits. So that shows a different how these different countries perform. But also, when it comes to the medium-term financing strategy for groundwater in the 3 countries, what is common across is that groundwater is hidden, it's not as prominent in other budget areas. So it's not a prominent budget area that you say, I'm budgeting for groundwater. It is hidden in rural water, for example, and sanitation. So it does not get an opportunity. When I say it is hidden, it means that even structure-wise, in the planning and the Department of Groundwater does not exist. For example, recently, water was planned before in Uganda under the works sector. You know, works is roads and etc. Now, if you have water below the works sector, it means something structurally influencing policy to have it out. But in that, I think has moved now. Uganda is realizing that. So if you have to fund groundwater, put it as a department and then have it financed. Can we move to the next slide? So then what about the outlook of domestic private finance? How does it look like in the 3 countries? Now, domestic private finance to a large extent is expected from the private sector, okay? And what is happening in the 3 countries, that the private sector is not yearning to come and finance water, despite the incentives in the legal is not as much yearning to do it, and that cuts across the 3 countries. And then do we have incentive? We ask another question for the private sector to come on board. Looking at the laws, looking at the economics of different countries, we see that Uganda had some incentives to attract private sector to come and fund groundwater, unlike the 3 countries. And then looking at the domestic credit from banks, we see packages of products for financing water in Uganda. We did not see that in the other countries. And that's bank credit. And then when we look at the aspect of bond financing, because bonds is one of the ways subnationals actually use to fund capital investment. Now, in the 3 countries, none of them had an active bond market for financing infrastructure, not only water. So, and that is a very big opportunity to explore. Equity, impact investment, we see in Senegal, impact investment, climate change, financing climate change as an opportunity to finance groundwater. We see that prominent in Senegal. We don't see it in other countries. And then household or community financing, because sustainability, the user pay principle. We see household financing coming out prominently in Uganda. And what is happening is that the private operators, the PPP through PPP models, okay? The private partners are on board and given a contract at a local government level to manage whoever uses water, they should pay a fee. But the challenge that one has at the moment is that the water infrastructure in Uganda, as a case study, that 20% of the water infrastructure is operational. And that has been put forward as an opportunity for private sector to operationalize as the users pay, because the willingness to pay is there. But the 80% of the infrastructure for water that government developed is not functional. And that's very sad. It's not what? Functional, much as the model for private sector, community-based private sector financing is picking up. I think people, I've talked already, people. So next, foreign public financing. Now, we see that to a large extent, these countries have been depending on foreign public finance. But we have seen now a movement away from granting to concessional financing. And that sends a message, because when you say concessional financing, you are expecting a person or an entity or private sector to come on board and utilize the concessional loan to go and fund. Well, if that is development partners are moving that direction, which means they're no longer expected or interested in funding grants which go through direct government. Now, that movement supposes the private sector should run very fast to go into that area and utilize. But also another thing we see that local governments are not, according to the law, cannot be funded directly using ODE concession loans. It should be the central government. But also another important thing is that the granting, of course, I've talked about the dwindling of granting. Then, the last slide, or second last slide, is about private financing. Now, in summary, in all the three countries, we saw a lot of philanthropic finance and private donations coming too much to fund groundwater infrastructure in the three countries. And we did not see FDI to a large extent. And then also the laws, I think partly the laws in Namibia and Senegal were affecting this. And then what are the conclusions we see from this study? First is that no single actor can provide sufficient funding for groundwater financial needs. Looking at the value chain of groundwater, which includes monitoring, which includes infrastructure, which includes other aspects of quality, there should be no single party, say government, can stand and say, I can fulfill those financing needs. Second, there's no single best pathway. We see community financing in the rural areas. We see the type large financing of bonding with our neighbors, for example, in TZ. So there's no single best way. There must be a suitable financing model to address that. Then the current incentive mechanisms, yes, we see the laws, but they target different sectors. They don't target the water sector. They say, well, yes, come, we shall remove taxes from you. But when you look at the laws, they list specific sectors, not water sectors, and that has to be addressed. And then, of course, looking at the regulatory framework at subnational level, there's a vacuum. Laws are made for the national level in the three countries. You don't see critical enforcement or regulations at that lower level. And then impact investment, you see as one area which is not really coming out as explored for groundwater specifically. And then there's a lot of high lack of demand for the concessional financing from the private sector and from government. And that sends a message. And that, what are the recommendations? I think we should not fear to advise governments to come out with incentive within the existing laws that target water. We should not fear that, because we have seen from our framework, incentives are catalysts to bring on board, whether legal, whether economic. Two, we need to develop capacity at subnational level to mobilize financing. That's a very weak area for all subnationals in the three countries also have like the opportunity we saw in Uganda. Now groundwater is becoming prominent, and water for that matter is becoming prominent as a budget area, because there's now a department at subnational level to mobilize resources. But also there's gold which is not yet utilized, explore climate finance. Can we utilize where people are looking at climate finance to exploit the use of groundwater? That's one of the potential areas. But also, can we utilize better models of financing where you have concessional grants, you have loans, where you have public finance to catalyze private investment, and then have a mix and move forward. Thank you very much, Lama.
Thank you, Yusuf. Thank you so much for this comprehensive presentation and on an area which we stepped, I think, really on new ground, and we started really by zero. So I think this is a good start to bring some light into this interlinkage between groundwater and finance. Yeah, I would like to get some feedback on these things, and therefore I would like to invite some panelists here, some experts to discuss on the issue of groundwater and finance. And first of all, I would like to ask Mrs. Tanja Rödiger-Vorwerk. She's deputy head of the Federal Ministry of Economics and Economic Development, and BMZ from Germany, Deputy Director for Global Health, Resilience and Equity. I hope this was correct. So, second person on the panel here whose physical presence is Mrs. Jennifer Wakange Bukoke, is it correctly? Sorry if I spelled it wrongly. Yeah, welcome, Jennifer, to the panel. Jennifer is Deputy Director for Local Transformation Finance from UNCDF. And we have here Bernd Schönewald. Bernd, please come to the panel. Bernd is expert from KfW for finance in the water sector. I think, we have three physical panelists. Additionally, we have some panelists who join us virtually. There is from Uganda, the district chairperson from Yumbe. His name is Asiku Abdul Mutalib Mahamud. I hope I spelled it correctly. Welcome, Mr. Mahamud. We have
Yes,
Mr. Andre. Yeah, welcome. We have Mr. Andre Niethling. He's farmer from Namibia. Welcome, Mr. Niethling. And we have two water experts from Uganda, Kalistini Mugaya, and from Uganda, and Bertram Swars from Namibia. Welcome, both. And last but not least, some finance experts from Senegal and Namibia, Dr. Nambata Nambeya from Namibia and Professor Birahimi Buna from Senegal. Welcome to this panel. So, yeah, this is a quite huge panel, I know, and I hope we still have enough time to get different perspectives, but I think it's very important also to get different perspectives from different stakeholders. I would like to start with Mrs. Rödiger-Vorwerk. You are representing German Development Corporation, and you got already some insights to the study. What do you think groundwater, what potential is there to contribute to SDGs, and what do you think, what is missing to unlock this potential?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you for the excellent presentations. And it's good to have a gender balance now. So, well, let me come back to what I heard at the last. And I would say this is the most important message to the political level. What I'm representing, I'm a public servant, but anyway, we have to advise political levels to make decisions. I think if we see these results together with the World Bank report some years ago, which was named Africa Can Feed Itself, I think then we have a big part of the picture. The last slide where we saw the obstacles is for me the most important slide, because there we have to tackle. And the third dot was there's not enough incentive for the private sector to make a business case out of it. And that's one of the most important things. Probably in brackets, the last years I was in the private sector, and this is what I learned. So if there's no business case behind it, there will be no private sector stepping in. And when we see at the same side that there are good regulations, and there are some countries where the regulations are forced and really brought to life, then I would say there's a good surrounding. And it's very interesting for me to hear these results, because I think it's really a hidden chance with the groundwater. I'm not sure if I see the full picture now, but what I see for the time being is that it's worthwhile to join forces and to work on this, because if we can get access to the groundwater and make somehow a case out of it, then it would be really, really, really a step forward.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Rödiger-Vorwerk. I had also discussions before on the issue, what is the difference between groundwater and surface water finance? And I don't know if it's Professor Mbale now online. Professor Mbale? Because I hope to get an answer from him. So he seems not to be online. Yusuf, who could you answer this question, or you know anybody who's I think it would be a good start, yeah? Yusuf, please just to briefly to describe.
Yes, the difference between groundwater and surface water is that groundwater requires initial investment. Capital outlay is very expensive because you have to dig and access that water, and that takes a lot of money compared to surface water, because surface water, you identify a source and pipe that water to wherever you want to take it. So the nature of capital, first of all, investment that you require for access groundwater is high. Two, the maintenance of this water, because for surface water, you need to use a lot of chemical, chlorine, okay, for example, to treat it and keep maintaining it, which to a large extent, in some parts, you don't have to do when you use surface water. That's another. Another thing is that groundwater, surface water is known where it is, and it can only be on the surface there. But groundwater, you will find it in places you don't expect to see, where you don't have surface water. So that gives you another advantage of access. It's more accessible. Like for example, you know, the Ministry of Agriculture and my another Ministry of Water has a map which shows where, even where you never expect water, it exists. That makes it a gold.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, from a financial perspective, I had a discussion with you, Jennifer, the difference to groundwater, surface water, very briefly.
Well, okay, we talked about, you know, from the financial perspective. Well, as Yusuf has mentioned, the cost for groundwater might be high, but it's a one-off investment. It will take time for you to, you know, maintain. So in the end, the cost is actually lower compared to the surface water. And then also when it comes to, you know, financing, some of the projects. You know, the groundwater, in most cases, they are maybe small projects unless you explore big ones. So if they are small, they would be funded using, you know, small grants or reimbursable grants. But if you go for surface water and you're looking at large infrastructure projects, then you have to look for other financing mechanisms, including the water, you know, bonds that Yusuf mentioned, you know, bringing in the private sector for concessional loans, because they are looking at a business case. You know, when they look at groundwater, in most cases, they don't see that immediate business case. But of course, it's there in the long run. If you have many families that are accessing the groundwater, you've put up a system with water tanks and you've opened up, you know, the pipeline to different communities. In the long run, it will have the economic benefit on top of the social benefit. But in summary, for your question, it would be financed mainly using, you know, small grants, reimbursable grants, because you're talking about working with communities, with local governments. Most of them are very rural. They even don't have the experience, as it was mentioned, in terms of, you know, accessing the concessional loans, even preparing the documents that will enable them to have that access. Probably they don't have the networks, the experience. So you would start with the grants and then build their capacity to be able to move to another level. Thank you.
Thank you. I have another question for you. So when we talk about groundwater, we realize it's a very decentralized resource. Most countries don't manage it at a central government level, so it's very much managed on the local level. So and also we heard that like we need investments in local governments, and capacity is one constraint. What is needed for a healthy financial ecosystem on such a local scale?
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm from UN Capital Development Fund, and there are a number of things that we are doing to improve the financing ecosystem, not only for water, but also for other aspects, including, you know, gender, you know, local economic development, etc. So one of the things we are working on is improving the intergovernmental fiscal transfers, because in most countries, that's the main source of funding for the local governments. Before they go to borrow, you know, the first call is on intergovernmental fiscal transfers. And so in some countries, you find they don't have the policies and regulations to enable that happen. The environment is not conducive for it to happen. So UNCDF will support to put in place mechanisms where funds can smoothly flow from the center to the local governments. And this has happened in many countries, including Uganda, where we have presented a case. And secondly, we are looking at improving own source revenue. You know, as colleagues have mentioned, the local governments, where there's decentralization, they'll be given functions. And one of the functions is on water supply, maintenance, protection of wells, etc. But there's no financing. So they are looking at local governments using their own resources to be able to finance water. So in that case, then we need to work with the local governments to expand their local tax base to be able to finance the unfunded mandates. So then we are also looking at the area of asset management in this ecosystem, because, you know, in most cases, when you go to a local government and you're talking about assets, they will be looking at the trucks, you know, those old vehicles, the files, the books in their offices, you know, the desks, and no one is thinking about the natural resources that they have. And groundwater is one of the biggest assets that they have. So as we talk about asset management, we open their eyes to see that even groundwater is an asset for them, and they can utilize that asset to improve their own source revenue. Colleagues have talked about the developing the domestic capital markets, including the use of pension funds, the insurance funds. These funds are there in most countries, but they are not utilized. You know, you don't see a local government or even a central government walking to the pension fund and asking them how they can utilize those resources to actually generate more resources for their people. So we are also looking at, some innovations around digitizing water, systems. We have examples of the prepaid systems in Uganda and other countries. And in some communities, when they have the prepaid meters for groundwater, it's very cheap. They can buy water of any amount that they have, once they are able to use those coins to get the water. So making it easy even for a local person to have access to clean and safe water. So these are some of the things that we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you so much. So yeah, good to get an idea about a healthy financial ecosystem, what is needed and where we are at the moment. I think this is a long way to march on. Yeah, it would be good at that point to get some practical experience from somebody who is really struggling to unlock finance. And we have, I'm happy that we have like the district chairperson from Yumbe, Uganda, Mr. Mahamud. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Do you have a picture or you have that we know how you look like? Have a camera.
Yes, yeah.
Very good. Welcome. Thank you that you join our session here today. It's very interesting to have you who's really facing all these problems and you are looking to unlock investments. Could you maybe first give us an idea how Yumbe looks like? So what kind of district is it? What is your main economical situation and what are the challenges you're facing so far? And maybe then to see what could maybe groundwater and the financial investments in groundwater, maybe how could that help you to improve your economical situation? Please, Mr. Mahmoud.
Yeah, thank you very much, moderator. I want to thank the organizers of this very important conference. As a matter of record, I'm Masik Abdul Mahmoud, the district chairperson of Yumbe District Local Government in Uganda. And we are at the forefront when it comes to service delivery across all the sectors. I'm very grateful that we are here in this conference and as a representative of the local governments, we are sharing our experiences as regards investment in groundwater and the challenges that are associated. Indeed, when you look at what's happening within the districts, the country, the most reliable and available source of water that we can say could be developed is groundwater. Because in Uganda, just as the previous speakers have said, our biggest challenge is the prolonged style of droughts, and therefore you cannot heavily rely on surface water. Most of our surface water bodies are seasonal, and therefore you cannot invest resources there. At the end, you don't get much out of them. And therefore investment in groundwater is the best way to go. On average, in Uganda, the safe water coverage is about 68%. This includes development in water sector on surface and also underground. But when you go to the local governments, especially in the way I come from, the safe water coverage is about 49%. And all this is water exploited from the ground, because we don't have surface waters that are throughout the season. We have seasonal surface waters, and therefore you cannot direct investments in that. So the safe water coverage is about 49%, and in most cases, this 49% only is looking at technologies of borehole, which has its own challenges. Because when you have metals in the ground that stay for over some good period of time, you expect the associated challenges with the extracting water underground from boreholes. Because over time, you have the pipes rusting, and eventually there may be sources of cancer. Therefore, investing in groundwater, where we are talking about piped water schemes, could be the best option for our communities. Recently, I am grateful to inform the conference members that we had a collaboration with the UNCDF when it comes to groundwater development. We made a humble contribution of about 35%, and the UNCDF provided about 65% of the funding. As I talk now, we are at the verge of commissioning this water project, and it's a project of about $350,000 US. So if we are looking at really investing in groundwater, where you have a project of $350,000 US, which is serving about 30,000 population, as compared to investment in boreholes, where you're only talking about 300 people, between 150 to 300 people. I think the best way is to look at piped water systems. In Yumbe district alone, so far, it's a district that has stayed for over 23 years, but we have only 7 piped water schemes, and on average, each of the 7 water schemes has a cost of about $300,000 US. We have very many town councils, we have very many rural growth centers that require investment of groundwater. If we are going to look at only the option of boreholes, where in a rural growth center, you have a very high population, and the issues of sanitation may be a very big question. Therefore, I think that investment in groundwater, where we are talking about provision of piped water schemes, is appropriate. Our biggest challenge as local governments, and also in Uganda, has been the issue of institutional development and also capacity building. I'm grateful that the previous speakers have highlighted about this, and I wish that we need to have special focus when it comes to institutional development and the capacity building at local government, because that's where the service delivery is, and we have the technical people who are supposed to supervise implementation of these projects on the ground. Where they have capacity gaps, this means that we may not be able to succeed in the implementation and also the sustainability of these projects. I say this because the 7 piped water schemes that I'm talking about, some of them were constructed about 15 years ago, and when you look at the stage in which they are now, you see that they need to look at the technical aspect. How do we build the capacity of the staff so that they're able to manage these water points without breaking it down? And some of the issues are related to policy at national level, because when it comes to management of the piped water systems, whether in municipalities, in cities, and even the rural growth centers, government of Uganda through Ministry of Water and Environment has come up with a policy that these piped water systems have been given to private operators. And these private operators are not procured by the local governments, they are procured by the Ministry of Water and Environment. And therefore, we don't have direct stake in the supervising and controlling the activities of these private operators. This brings me to the concern which Madam Jennifer raised about enhancing the capacity of local governments through ensuring that they have enough financial resources to support the infrastructure development and maintenance of the infrastructures that we have within the local governments. If at all, the local governments, we are the ones responsible for managing these piped water systems, then the resources, financial resources, could be directly managed by them. But these resources are controlled by central government. This means that we still have a very big challenge in Uganda of the decentralization that we talk about in Uganda is not the decentralization that we expected, where we talk of full devolution of powers to the local government so that they take decision in whatever can be appropriate for them when it comes to service delivery. Most of the issues are still controlled at the central government level. If the government of Uganda could borrow a lead from Kenya, because we have counties in Kenya that are very powerful, that take decisions, that are responsible for identifying their local revenue sources, that will be appropriate so that we're able to sustain. In the meantime, I can say that, yes, we have gone very far, but we still have limitations when it comes to some of those areas where, as local governments, we can have the capacity to sustain these projects that have been identified. We have some gaps, like when it comes to financing, we have had the issues of bilateral cooperation between government, either local government, because I am sharing this with the experience of the contribution that UNCDF gave us, and also our contribution to that effect. Recently, we are also constructing a pipe water scheme where we made contributions, and the Austrian Red Cross has also given us support. So if we can
Mr. Mahmoud, we are very short in time, so could you maybe end with the last sentence?
Yes, we are personally, I'm extremely grateful for the support that we are getting from partners, and also as local governments. We commit that we will do what is within our means to see that we enhance our local revenue base and also support investments in groundwater. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mahmoud. So that was a perspective from district manager to give a picture. Yumbe is at the border to South Sudan. I think they are facing challenges with refugees, and to provide not only water for the own communities, also for the refugees, and a very agricultural area. So 90%, I think, is working in the agriculture sector. So agriculture is also the buzzword for the next speaker, Mr. Andre Niethling. So it would be very interesting to hear your perspective. You are a farmer. Could you maybe explain how big is your farm, and what kind of things are you farming, so that we get an idea? And yes, please, Andre, could you do you hear us, and could you switch on your camera? Andre, are you online? I think it seems he's not. In that case, we will not have the farmer's perspective in the room. So I would then go to the next speakers. So farmers, they are interested to extract the water, and the biggest water consumer in the world is the agricultural sector. So there's always a concern, and is also correct if we look to certain areas like the MENA region, but also in some areas, for example, in the SADC region, there are some dry areas. So to see if it is really sustainable, if we would increase the groundwater use. And so we have two representatives from quite very different countries with the groundwater situation. There's Uganda, which has maybe not really huge groundwater aquifers, but very high recharge rates and precipitation. And we have Dr. Kalistini Mugaya from the Ministry of Water and Environment from Uganda. Kalis, could you please give a short assessment from your side? Is it sustainable? How is the level of sustainability, and how is the potential of groundwater to increase the social economic benefits? Please, Kalist.
Thank you very much, moderator. I want to thank organizers for inviting me to give a perspective on this discussion. Yes, indeed, the groundwater, as the colleagues have mentioned, Uganda is depending largely on groundwater for domestic water supply. We are also expanding to actually improve agriculture, irrigation through groundwater. Groundwater is also supporting a lot of industrial activities. So we are making sure that groundwater actually contributes to socio-economic development of the country through understanding the resource. We now are undertaking a study to quantify all our groundwater resources in the country. We want to know the distribution. We want to know how much we are using now. We want also to know how much we'll use up to the year 2040. And we are developing a national groundwater development and management strategy and policy. And we do hope that once we have done that, then we'll be able to bring groundwater from underground and put it on the table, make sure that we mobilize financing for it, because I think, as has been mentioned, groundwater is undercover, oftentimes is taken for granted. And I think the other thing which I think the researchers have indicated is we really don't know how much groundwater is contributing to the socio-economic development of the country. So yes, we have groundwater. It is recharged actively. We don't have large aquifers, but we feel that the groundwater we have can support many of our development activities. We only need to make sure that we know where it is, how we can develop it, and how we can ensure that it is managed well, regulated well, and monitored well for the benefit of the present and future generation. Thank you.
That's very, very good to hear from an expert from Uganda how the situation is, and that's finally underlines what the facts which carried out BGS, that there is enough water in sub-Saharan Africa. I've seen there is now the farmer Andre Niedling. Andre, can you hear us now? Oh, he disappeared again. So then I hope, Andre, I think he's in here. Yes, welcome, Andre. Can you maybe shortly describe your farm? What are you farming? How big it is? What kind of products, agricultural products, do you produce? Andre, does it work out? Seems to have connectivity problems. I tried with another person from Namibia. I hope the connection to Namibia is good. So Bertram Swartz from the Ministry of Water. Bertram,
hi.
So your connection to Windhoek is better, so it seems.
I'm a bit south of Windhoek. I'm in a town called Riobos, but I think Andre should be able to connect. I think he's stuck somewhere. So I think
yeah,
it's
the same
important.
question to you then to Caliste. What potential do you see? We have a very different situation. No recharge, nearly no recharge, very little recharge, but a really huge aquifer. How do you assess the situation for Namibia, the socio-economic potential?
Thanks, Ramon, and thanks for this opportunity. I think it's important to note that groundwater always has an opportunity to positively support livelihoods and provide economic opportunities, especially in Namibia. Looking at this at our current situation in Namibia, but it must be noted that proper management is important. And there is always that opportunity to use groundwater to elevate not only the government's stance, but also local government and also stakeholders and users on grassroots level. The two major demands on the groundwater resources is in urban centers in Namibia and also agriculture. And the availability of groundwater, as you've said, large aquifers, but it's largely limited in most parts of the country. So we saw in the recent droughts that an increasing demand has brought forward the need for unconventional methods of and sources of water supply. You know, groundwater actually came to the forefront there, and we saw that it gave us an opportunity to survive and prosper. But the opportunity is limited in that we need to understand because it's not a need to obviously that. And I think I actually wanted to delve onto what Andre was to say about the sporadic recharge events and you know, the pressures on groundwater systems. So even though there's an opportunity and there's potential, we in Namibia look towards groundwater as saving graces in times of need. So that opportunity is there, but it also needs to be taken quite looked at a very conservative way, because we transfer water into areas where and into regions where we don't have, and it's normally groundwater that's being transferred. And yes, that opportunity for it to be there it's there, but you know, overexploitation is sometimes, and also the risk of contamination is sometimes there, and we need to safeguard these resources in times of drought. I mean, it's a limited potential growth or development, and we're wiser to save water for the drier day. In Namibia, we've got that understanding, and we definitely you know, thrive on that. So even though there's potential and there's an opportunity to develop it further, we have to be cognizant of the fact that it's not a finite source, especially in Namibia, and especially with the current climatic variations. We have to be very careful and do forward modeling to say different scenarios. If no rainfall is to happen, what is it that we can sustainably remove from these aquifers, and for future generations and for future sustainable use. Thanks, Ramon.
Thank you very much for your perspective. So the objective, at least also with that session, is to upscale financing groundwater, and that's where we need bigger donors and bigger players like the development banks. There's a World Bank, there's African Development Bank, but there's also KfW. And Bernd Schönewald from KfW, he's sector economist from KfW, and he had a look at the tool. And I know maybe the time is not ripe now to talk about upscaling these things, but we would be good to know where is the way going to, how do you assess the potential of the tool? What is maybe missing? What should we maybe, how should we elaborate the tool? Ben, could you maybe give us a quick assessment?
Yes, thank you. I will try. So first of all, just to mention that KfW is working on behalf of the German government, providing funding for investments also in Africa. Africa is one of the focal regions of German development cooperation. So we provide, for example, also funding for water in Uganda and Namibia, which is mainly water supply, but we are working with these countries. So to your question, well, basically what I have to say, I mean, it's of course it's good to look at the situation to get an idea of what the analysis was done for the three countries. So it's good to have an overview of the situation and let's say the gaps, where the gaps, where the areas which still need to be developed. So I think that is good that this kind of work is being done. And also it's good to look at the specific issue of financing. So not focus on the water sector maybe as such, but on the financing conditions. Also have a look at the financial sector in the country. So I think this is very good. So this is a way forward with a framework. So the challenges I see, but of course, generally that as was discussed, there's a challenge to unlock private funding. What I see is, okay, let's say one issue is financial sector maturity in the countries, where I would say, okay, because there was a mentioning of there's no bond market, and so I think that's quite a mature tool. And even in a country like Kenya, which is quite well developed also regarding the financial market, and there is private sector funding from banks in Kenya to the water sector, but it was not possible to unlock funding via bond market. The Dutch corporation has tried it, but they had to give up on that. So just to mention that. So I think it is good to look at the financial sector, at the situation and what still needs to be developed. And maybe just a notion on international private finance. I think international private finance is looking for big tickets. They're not coming for small projects. And that, I think that's one of the where it's going to be difficult to attract international private finance, except of philanthropic finance. That's I think a special case. So what are recommendations? I would say, so I would distinguish, let's say, further between agricultural use and a human water supply use, because for agriculture, I see a case, let's say, of where you can show that there is, that you can have a positive return on investment. I think that is much more easy there than with water supply, human water supply, where usually the return on investment is not so high for different reasons. You have even like usually a problem with covering with cost coverage. So, so I think it's good to distinguish between those two. And what I was missing is the analysis of the institutional level, because it's a lot about the funding. I mean, the potential investors look at the situation of the institutions. So, are they private? Are they public? How are they structured? What are the management and technical capacities? What is the performance? I think that is an area which is very important, and I have the impression that it's not properly included yet in the framework. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bernd. This is of very high value, and I very much appreciate your how we could improve this tool. And so time ran out, and we are almost 1 minute after. I would give the closing to New York. In New York, there is a headquarter of UNCDF, and there's Jaffa Machanum. Jaffa, could you maybe close the session with a few findings from your side? Jaffa Machano is also a finance expert from UNCDF. Jaffa, please, with a few sentences, which
thank you, Ramon. Can you hear me?
We hear you really well. Thanks.
Yeah. So thank you for the organization and the leadership that BGR and the German government has taken on this exercise for the last 2 years. We really, really appreciate that. And all the partners that we've worked together, the research institutes, the ministries and partners when we are piloting and developing the tool in Uganda, Senegal, and Namibia. With that, I want to suggest the following 4 initiatives as a resolving of this work, since we are moving now from the research of the last 2 years and piloting to actually forming an implementation plan. One is to support AMCO and the partner countries in scaling up this diagnostic and adoption of the financing framework in different African countries. 2 is the gentleman from KfW has just suggested, to create partnership with other development financing agencies and commercial financiers to make this exercise as practical and implementable as it can be done, as it's evolving now into a usable tool. Third is to provide technical assistance to local public entities to effectively execute groundwater investments, especially on the issue of capacity building, which has been touched down a lot here to both local governments and other water agencies. And fourth is based on this report and the discussions here today, we believe there's a need of continuing to innovate and develop appropriate blending financing instruments to support the most vulnerable communities. We've seen the example of Karamoja and others that might not be able to afford fully private market-based financing options. With that, I want to call upon the stakeholders in the water sectors, financing sector, knowledge-based institutions and others to continue these efforts as were discussed here today, and to support adoption of investments in the groundwater in Africa for both domestic agriculture and in general for the promotion of economic development in the water sector. We will continue to undertake and support the knowledge base research as we are turning into the implementation and to develop realistic implementable action plans. We want to thank BGR and AMCO and to at the same time request their continuous support for BGR to bring and coordinate with other donors, and for AMCO to continue as an entity that coordinates and establish the mechanism of monitoring and progress for going forward. With that, I want to close this workshop and fully appreciate all our partners and ability to develop the groundwater investments in Africa. Over to you, Ramon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jaffa. So I also want to close the session. First, a big applause for the panelists here physically, but also for the panelists online, virtually. Big applause, please. And for all the speakers, and which are the only physical speaker here for Yusuf and online. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming, and I hope we could raise some interest for this topic. Goodbye.
Okay, thank you.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.